This is a special report from Channel 1 Atlanta. Good evening to you. I'm David Dutton in the Channel 1 Atlanta Command Center in Atlanta. It's about 10 minutes before 8 o'clock on your Friday evening. We have a major breaking news event that is occurring tonight on the other side of the world in Iran, where apparently Israel has launched a major airstrike against Iran this evening. This is a retaliatory strike after Iran hit Israel several weeks ago now with over 180 missiles. IDF has confirmed this. CBS, CNN, and Fox is also reporting this at this time. We understand from Fox News that a White House was notified a short time ago, just before Israel launched its strikes on Iran. An official said there. Again, if you're just joining us, a major breaking news event is happening at this hour. Israel has started retaliatory strikes against Iran. We have live coverage of this all night long, and we're going to go now to begin our coverage with Fox News.
Not hitting. If you're hitting into Iran, you're probably not hitting a nuclear site, and you're probably not hitting an oil refinery. And I think that's fairly safe to say. You're hitting something that goes right to the heart of the regime in terms of how they control military, paramilitary forces. And I would not be surprised if they're going towards something even more symbolic, much closer to Ayatollah Khomeini, and I'll kind of leave it at that. So that would be my inference from what I've seen so far.
Joe, I got to ask you too, because Iran is, of course, the proxy that is the head of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, every organization that we've been talking so much about over the past year. And you know what? I'm getting a new post in from Jackie Heinrich, Fox News correspondent. When asked about U.S. troops and assets in the region, a U.S. official pointed us to John Kirby's public comments that the U.S. has sufficient force posture in the region to be able to help Israel defend itself. So to be able to, and I'm getting a note from my producer here that this continues on. The U.S. has sufficient force posture in the region to be able to help Israel defend itself, and it continues and will adjust as appropriate, including if Iran decides to attack again. Kirby said, our commitment to Israel's security remains ironclad, and that means, as appropriate, make and enforce posture changes that we think need to be made to help Israel defend itself. That's what John Kirby said. So as we wait to learn more about this strike, Joe, I got to ask, from Israel's perspective, and really from the Middle Eastern perspective as a whole, how significant is it? A year ago, if you had seen news reports of Iran and Israel striking each other directly, I think we would have thought that was a pretty alarming thing to talk about. Can you put this in context for us? How significant is it that we've been watching Israel and Iran go back and forth directly with each other now twice within the past year?
Oh, it's absolutely significant. But at the same time, if you've been following this conflict or the conflicts in the region over the last few years, especially over the last few years, rather, you could say that this is inevitable. All right. We've seen this kind of shadow war between the Iranians and the Israelis in different areas of the region, especially in Syria. So I'm not surprised here. Now, what is a little bit worrying here is that it's been happening. This is not just a one-time thing, right? We've seen it in April, and now we saw it a few weeks ago. But this time, the Israelis are responding in a much more forceful way. So, again, I'm not surprised about this, but it does. I think it also spells out that. Not only the region is getting closer and closer to the brink of an all-out war. And I think this is what makes everybody nervous here, right? Especially Israelis, obviously the Iranians, and Washington D.C., of course. So this is.
Good evening once again. This is David Dutton in the Channel 1 Atlanta Command Center. Just to reiterate for those of you that are just joining us from the X platform and YouTube and other social media outlets from around the world, that a major breaking news event is occurring at this hour. The IDF has confirmed that Israel is launching a major retaliatory attack against Iran at this hour. This is happening during the overnight hours into your early Saturday, Israel and Iran time. I think Iran is about 30 minutes behind Israel, but it's the middle of the night in Iran as these strikes are coming down across the country at this time. And we are also learning, as you're seeing there on your screen now, that strikes are also occurring from Israel and Iraq and Syria. So new information just in: Israel launching airstrikes against Iran, Iraq, and Syria at this hour. As this is a major breaking news event, we're going to continue our live coverage throughout the night as we go back to Fox News.
If there may have been some discussion, shall we say, to coordinate some actions, maybe some more expanded intelligence sharing, because these are the types of places, also Iraq and Syria, where I'd be concerned that they would attack U.S. Airbase or U.S. facilities there. Certainly, where I used to be stationed at Al Lambar Air Base. That would be one that would be high on the list of potential strikes from Shiite militia groups in Iraq. And so I imagine they may have coordinated to do some, certainly from an Israel standpoint, doing some preemptive stuff, and certainly from the U.S. standpoint, enhancing our force security posture. And I'll leave it at that. So
we are seeing from Hussein Abdul Hussein, he's also with the FDD. Too many Islamist Iran octopus arms, no problem. Israel takes on Islamist Iranian targets in Iran, Iraq, Syria simultaneously. Joe, that speaks to what you and I were discussing earlier. I believe the IDF statement said 7 fronts. So really, we keep talking about this being Iran and Israel directly, but there are a lot of other factors involved in this. This is a complex operation that we're working with here, Joe.
Absolutely. And again, there are, I would say, at least about 28 Iran-backed groups around Israel's borders. That's a lot, and all of these organizations, they have some capabilities, right? Some have a few rockets, but others have, like the Iraqi militias, for example, or Lebanese Hezbollah. They have drones, they have ballistic missiles, they have cruise missiles. So one could say some of these groups they're armed to the teeth. So they are a problem. And separately, I do want to say that, when we hear about strikes in Syria, strikes in Iraq as well, it wouldn't surprise me here, and I've seen the Israelis do this before, that they'll strike areas, especially military targets, let's say radar installations, to essentially clear the way for the main force to come through. Okay, I'm not saying it happened here, but it's definitely possible. So that may have happened in this case. So I just wanted to bring that up. But again, there's about 28 Iran-backed groups around Israel's borders, so they have a lot to deal with here. So I'm not surprised to see some of these comments, and especially the one from Hussein, which he's absolutely correct.
Al, I got to ask you, so we're hearing that the U.S. was given advance notice before these strikes. Why does the U.S. need to know about this ahead of time?
Really, force protection. We have forces arrayed all over the Middle East, but certainly in the Persian Gulf area. It allows us to raise our shield, so to speak, if you will, certainly from an air defense standpoint, but also it allows us to position assets perhaps at sea that could potentially interdict Iranian missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones going back over to Israel. That's always proved decisive in the past. If I could add something that Joe kind of added, that's actually when you do a strike mission, one of the things you like to do is wipe out their ability to detect you en route. And of course, that means taking out air defense radars and things like that. And what's interesting is if you kind of look at the most direct route from Israel to where they would like to do probably most of the strikes, you would assume, well, they're going to fly over Jordan and probably over Saudi Arabia and maybe part of Kuwait. However, you may recall that Iran issued it's not even a veiled threat. It was just a threat to Saudi Arabia and Jordan, the other countries, said, hey, if Israel overflies your airspace, we will consider you a potential threat and take action appropriately, which is another way of saying that they were threatening to strike Saudi Arabia and other countries. It may be, and this is strictly a postulation, that they may have diverted some of their airstrike capability to fly over places like Syria and Iraq. Number one is they're not going to get permission from Syria to do anything. All right. And they're probably not going to get permission from Iraq to do anything either. So they would fly over, but en route, if there were any air defense radars or air defense capabilities there that the Shiite militias held, well, they'd like to take them out. And so that is a possible
It's 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and I'm David Dutton live from Atlanta with continuing coverage of a major breaking news event. If you're just joining us here at the top of the hour, we want to get you updated on a major breaking news event that is occurring right now in Iran, where Israel has started retaliatory strikes against Iran at this hour after Iran launched over 180 missiles against Israel several weeks ago. We also understand that Israel is launching strikes in Iraq and Syria at this hour. So 3 countries are receiving the strikes from Israel this evening. That's Iran and also Iraq and Syria. As this anticipated retaliatory strike that we've been anticipating for weeks after Iran sent the missiles into Israel again several weeks ago has now apparently begun. This has been confirmed by the IDF themselves. It's also being reported by all the major media outlets. Now, we're going to bring you a live continuing coverage from several reliable sources throughout the night. We'll be here all night long to cover this event. In particular, and in full detail at the moment, in the last few minutes or since this news broke within the past half hour, we've have seen like a major shock and awe event, like some of you may remember from back in the day during the first Persian Gulf War. The skies have not lit up yet. Not saying we won't see anything like that, but so far the pictures we're getting in, at least the live pictures from the feeds that we're seeing right now, is not showing anything like that. But the IDF is confirming that retaliatory strikes have begun in 3 countries, including Iran, Syria, and Iraq. Just because we're not picking them up at the moment, of course, does not mean something is not happening there. But maybe as this evening continues, we may start seeing strikes actually in front of the camera where these cameras are. I believe right now you're looking at a live look at Beirut, Lebanon. I believe we're in Beirut, Lebanon with this picture. And we'll also maybe have some pictures from Iran coming soon here in a few moments. But just because you're not seeing a shock and awe scene, if you will, on your screen right now doesn't mean this is a live look into the country right now from northern Israel. So that's what we're looking at the moment. But just because you're not seeing a whole lot going on doesn't mean there's not a major, full-scale retaliatory strike underway right now. It's just not happening in front of the camera at the moment. I would presume that we may see something shortly or soon as this event continues. But this is a major retaliatory strike against Iran. It also includes Iraq and Syria. And again, we'll have coverage for you all night long from a variety of sources. And where coverage continues right now as we go back to Fox News.
By the Israelis. Of course, Hassan Nasrallah was the Secretary General of Lebanese Hezbollah. But also, we have to recall as well that the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, he was eliminated in Tehran by the Israelis. So this happened several months ago, but that was a blow as far as not only to Hamas, but it really embarrassed the Iranians. Listen, you kill the head of Hamas in Tehran. That's a big deal. And it just demonstrated that the Iranians could not essentially protect one of their prized guests. So it was very embarrassing. So, the culmination, there was a lot of things going on that compelled the Iranians to essentially to attack Israel, right? So again, I think what we're trying to avoid here, at least what everyone is trying to avoid here, is as Hal was saying earlier, a response to response to response to a response. It's because there'll just be a cycle here. So I think this is what everyone's trying to avoid. But a lot of this, you can talk about Lebanon and northern Israel, or you can go all the way back to October 7th, how that really kicked everything off. So there's a lot of examples one can cite here that can say, well, this is what led to this day.
Mm-hmm. So Hal, let's talk about what's been going on in Lebanon, because this Iran-Israel direct attack at each other, this is only one facet of a much wider conflict. What has been happening in Lebanon as of late, not only in southern Lebanon, but also in the Beirut metro? What have we been seeing?
Major strikes, and they started kicking up this week. There was a period of pause with strikes that were taking place in the Beirut area. Never stopped down south. They kept striking constantly. And by the way, I should mention that the volume of these strikes is rather stunning. I mean, it's over 100 airstrikes a day, in some cases much more than 100 airstrikes a day that are taking place. And of course, they're doing the airstrikes in and around Beirut, hitting some key command and control targets, weapon caches, all sorts of different things down there. Of course, one of their tactics or whatever is to they do this rather interesting notification system, which is very extensive, where they call the area, not only the target building, but everything around the target building, and notify everybody there, we are coming in. You need to evacuate. And they give them enough time to literally pick up and get out of there before the strike takes place. It's rather unprecedented in warfare that you see something quite that extensive that's taken place, but that is one of the things they've been doing, which is kind of help keep down the collateral damage in terms of what's happening up around Beirut. But that's what's happening. Of course, today the big issue was that one of the airstrikes in southern Lebanon actually killed 3 journalists. So that's causing a lot of reverberations across the international community, but certainly the media landscape, because 3 journalists were killed in an airstrike. I'm kind of wondering what exactly they were aiming for with that airstrike. Not to say that mistakes don't happen in warfare, but there was probably something else. I'm sure that they were definitely aiming for that they thought was there, and maybe it was there for all I know. Maybe there's a reason why the journalists were there. So that was some of the stuff that's happening. What's interesting is we talk about these strikes, and we mention strikes in Syria, strikes in Iraq. Why do they mention those? Because you would actually notice strikes in Syria and Iraq as being exceptional rather than the daily rule. If they said, oh, we also did strikes in Lebanon, the question is, okay, so what's different today than Tuesday? Because they've been doing constant strikes in Lebanon at such a volume that it would be difficult to actually tell, well, what was part of this and what was part of what was already going on. So it doesn't stand out quite the same way. I will be curious to see what happens in the Houthi area. That's one that I have not seen mentioned yet. It may be that we're going to hear something soon. I don't know. I haven't heard it mentioned yet, but there could have been something tied to this with dealing with the Houthis, or they could have something else that they have ready if the Houthis launch, because I would be surprised if the Houthis don't do something. When something like this happens, they will tend to launch drones or ballistic missiles that usually are not too effective. They usually get interdicted, but they could launch them. And then I would expect that we might hear something where there was another big strike mission down in Yemen hitting the Houthi areas. That would be something that would not surprise me in the least if that occurred. But again, we haven't heard that yet. But that's what's been going on in southern Lebanon. Actually, all of Lebanon is the strike missions. One area I should point out, though, it appears the strike missions have diminished greatly, if not stopped, in northern Lebanon. That may be because they prosecuted the targets they need to prosecute up there. I'm not sure. But they have kind of pulled back from northern Lebanon. And I think some of that was also as due to some of the discussion and dialogue with the Lebanese government to pull out of some of those areas, because some of the areas they were hitting, even though they were Hezbollah targets, these were in villages that were predominantly not Shiite areas. And that was causing some serious political problems for the Lebanese government.
Joe, before I let you go here, what questions do you have about where this goes from here? Obviously, we're still awaiting what exactly Israel has struck, but I'm curious personally about how Iran will respond to this. What questions do you have?
Right, you mentioned it, right? What have the Israelis hit, and if they obviously were successful at it, and I think that will play into how Iran responds. Again, I think what everyone is looking for here is that the Israelis hit or respond to the Iranian ballistic missile attack, and it will stop there. I think that's the goal here. So I think the next few hours are very important here. But as you know, as Hal mentioned, if Iran wants to respond, it doesn't necessarily have to respond from Iran. Again, remember, it has its proxies. It's essentially its tools, right? So the Houthis in Yemen are a perfect example. The drones, the cruise missiles, the ballistic missiles. So you may see some activity from them, and also by the Iraqi militias, and then there's Syrian militias as well, and obviously Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is still a very powerful force. So a lot, again, it just goes back, depends on what the Israelis hit and what strategy the Iranians will have moving forward.
Joe, we appreciate you being generous with your time tonight. We do have to take a commercial break. We'll be back with more breaking coverage.
What if we never started Gunner, or bought our first work van, or believed in the American dream? What if we never decided to install our first roof, or our second, or our 5,000th? What if we never felt the need to put the customer first? Would we have ever earned all of these awards, or felt the satisfaction of giving a family a new roof over their head, or started Gunner Cares to support our heroes? And best of all, we're just getting started.
There is a storm coming, an event like the world has never seen before. The emerging event will have little to do with weather, but more about developing situations that were foreseen many years ago. We have always warned you during severe weather and news events that affected many. Now, Channel 1 Atlanta begins a new series to warn you about what's coming soon and make sure you are prepared. Join us on a new journey, as according to a recent survey, a lot of people believe we are living in the last days. Current news events show us now more than ever. In history, time is setting the stage for the coming storm. A new series, now playing only on Channel 1, Atlanta.
Again, a confirmed tornado on the ground in downtown Conyers. It's a very dangerous and life-threatening weather event. Get into the interior section of your house, away from windows or a basement if you have. And there's the debris right there in the Millstead area near the Rockdale Medical Center. Right. Channel 1 Atlanta.
This statement is what we have from the IDF so far. I want to focus on one of those last sentences there. They say, their defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. What are their defensive and offensive capabilities in that particular part of the Middle East, around Iran?
Their ability to do strike missions with aircraft, F-35s, F-16s, F-15s. They would have those capabilities. They have ballistic missile capability. They have drone capability, and there were reports earlier in the week that that there were drones. In fact, I think that was part of that leaked document story, that there were drones that the Israelis have. And of course, they have what are referred to as stealth drone capability, which is the ability to put drones in that cannot be detected. And I wouldn't be surprised if those might be used against air defense systems, maybe not taking out the nuclear sites, but taking out a number of air defense capabilities in or around some of these very sensitive Iranian sites. Part of what they're doing is very kinetic, as from all the reports we're seeing, but part of it also may be part of messaging, which says, okay, if we want to keep this going, this is where it can go, and now you can't protect these sites because we took out your air defense. So I would not be surprised if that would be something we might see the stealth drone capability being used for. Certainly on the defensive side, there's the entire Iron Dome system with all the different missile capabilities that they have across the board. There's anti-drone capability, although as we've seen in the recent weeks, there are some gaps in the drone air defense capabilities because some drones got through. And of course, the other part is that the U.S. has THAAD, which is a very high altitude air defense system, and there's about 100 U.S. troops there. And within the context of what's happening, those U.S. troops in Israel, not only could they become a target, I would be surprised if the Iranians, if they, and they're almost assuredly going to do a counterstrike. I would be surprised if the Iranians don't intentionally try to strike the THAAD system to take out the capability, but also to try and incur any casualties they can with the U.S. forces in order to make a larger statement. That would seem to be very logical with what they do. Now, as far as we know, and it's certainly from what everybody's saying, that the U.S. has had no part in conducting these strikes. This is strictly Israel that is conducting these strikes, although the U.S. does have intelligence sharing with Israel. So on that level, certainly there's a level of cooperation. But that's not the same thing as saying that U.S. missiles or aircraft entered Iranian airspace to conduct strikes. That has not happened, although throughout the Persian Gulf and throughout the Middle East, there are U.S. forces there who are prepared, ready, and in the past have interdicted Iranian missiles and drones headed in the direction of Israel. And I'm assuming that they're all on high alert right now, ready to do the same, depending on what comes next.
Fox's Jackie Heinrich saying 2 U.S. defense officials are telling Fox News that the U.S. was notified in advance of Israel's plan to strike Iran tonight in retaliation for Iran's October 1st attack. Two defense officials also telling Fox that the U.S. had no involvement in Israel's operation. Remind us, Hal, what has the U.S. said about what not to strike when we're talking about what they've said to Israel? What have they said that they don't want Israel to target?
Well, Austin, that's an interesting anthology. One thing that Israel was kind of hinting at was the nuclear capability. The fear is that Iran is very close or could be very close to creating a functional nuclear warhead, and they have quite a bit of ballistic missile capability. So you can put those two together and see why everyone would be concerned about that. So the thought was that they might strike the nuclear facilities, and the U.S. came out, as did others, and basically suggested that Israel not do that, or I should say, tried to tell Israel not to do that. And Israel, pretty much as far as we know, probably took that off the list. Now, we will know more once we know what targets they actually hit, but that's what they, that was kind of one of the things that the U.S. has said, don't hit that. Then President Biden, I don't know if he was making an off-the-cuff statement or something. He mentioned, well, maybe they should hit their oil capabilities or oil production, oil refineries. And then the price of global oil jumped 10% the next day. And then the day after, he came back and says, no, they shouldn't hit the oil refineries and oil facilities. And so as far as we know, the U.S. position and what we've been telling Israel is that they will not hit those facilities. And as far as we know, Israel, from the statements made, has agreed that they would not take out the nuclear facilities, and they would not aim for the oil facilities either. But that leaves open a number of other targets. And certainly the fact that there are reports of strikes in Tehran indicates that they probably went after some top leadership, command and control type targets. Perhaps something tied to the Al-Quds Force, which is their international covert network dealing with all these terrorist groups and militias all over the place. And of course, the parent organization of that, which is the Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, which also controls the ballistic missiles and a lot of the drones that have been seen in the past, to include drones and missiles that were sent to attack Israel, and certainly back in April, and the missile attacks in October, early October. So those would be high on my list of things that were probably being targeted.
Al, I want to bring in Alon Burstein. He's a Tufts University visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Your initial reaction to what little we know about this developing situation?
So it's good to see you, Austin, and good to see you also, Hal. Look, we don't know a lot so far about what is actually happening, but the initial reports started with explosions that occurred in Tehran. Then there were reports of explosions that were occurring in several other cities in Iran, some of them quite important and interesting when it comes to what might be targeted but in this initial attack. Then, and this I think may be a critical point, we started to see reports of explosions that are occurring, very likely targeting Iranian interests across the Middle East. We have seen reports in Syria, we've seen in Damascus, we've seen in several different places, in Al-Khalib and other things. There's also a report just came out of Sabarin News, which is one of the news networks of the Iraqi militias, saying that there are explosions that are occurring in Iraq. Why I say that's instrumental is actually not because, oh, look, Israel maybe is targeting all of Iran's interests. Actually, on the contrary, it may very well be that because Israel is targeting other Iranian interests in the Middle East, we're actually going to see less of an attack on Iran itself. There's going to be attacks that occur in Iran, but it's not going to be Israel throwing its full force, full weight against Iran. Instead, it's going to be a show of force in Iran itself. But the bulk of the attack could be against the Iranian interests as a way to say we've hit back and now we can spiral down, as opposed to we're now escalating. Again, very initial, obviously, but that's my initial thoughts when I saw that there's explosions happening in Syria and Iraq also.
And Alon, obviously the goal here, this is something we've already been speaking about with Hal and Joe, but the ultimate goal here is to have a response, but to not drag this on any longer than it needs to, correct?
Look, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because there are a lot of elements within the cabinet in Israel that are saying now is the time to strike. Iran, for years, has built up its capabilities with Hezbollah, with Khatib Hezbollah in Iraq and in Syria, with the Houthis in Yemen, with Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and right now, almost ironically, as a result of October 7th and the war, all of those proxies have already been on the defensive. Israel's engaged with all of them. So the big threat that Iran has tried to develop over the years, saying we're untouchable because if you touch us, we flip a switch and the entire Middle East can go up in flames, targeting U.S. interests, targeting Israel. The majority of the Middle East has gone up in flames in terms of targeting Israel and targeting U.S. interests. So there are a lot of voices within Israel's cabinet, I remind you, it's a very hawkish right-wing cabinet, that are saying, no, now is the time to escalate. Now is the time. Netanyahu, for years, has been talking about the Iranian threat, the nuclear threat at the UN, at every possible forum. Okay, now you have the time. Now you have the opportunity. Now you go and carry out the strike. So it is possible. I would not be surprised if there are elements who are thinking, no, actually, Israel intends to escalate the situation. And there's, of course, other considerations that are much more cynically political. But I'm saying even if we just look at it from the military perspective, it could be that Israel will be seeking to escalate. It's also important to remember that Iran itself, and almost directly from the supreme leader, Khamenei, sent messages to different Arab countries in the region in the last several weeks and said, if Israel does not escalate this further, if the retaliation is more moderate or more contained, we will consider this round closed. We can consider this round, we attacked, you attacked, kind of like what we saw in April, which is, again, maybe, very, very maybe, why Israel would be targeting also Iranian interests in other countries and not throwing its full weight against Iran itself.
So Hal, what do we make of the timing of this attack? We know that there were some leaked documents. This is the overnight hours, which I believe is something that we've become accustomed to. These major events always seem to happen in the overnight hours in the Middle East. But it does appear, at least because of that document leak, that this retaliation was delayed, correct?
All reports are that, yes, it was delayed. And of course, part of that was, and look, I may have been involved with planning a few strike missions in the past, and I will tell you that you prefer to strike at night. Undercover darkness. First off, it makes it more difficult to see your aircraft at night, particularly if you're employing stealth capabilities with your aircraft. The other part is it has a tremendous psychological disadvantage for whomever you're striking. Most people sleep at night, and so it causes them to wake up. It causes, usually they have less people on duty at night. So there's a lot of reasons why you would strike under cover of darkness, and that I don't really read much into that. If I was to say, when will they strike? I would say, 90% chance they'll strike at night, 10% they'll strike during the day. And even then I would caveat that other 10% to say they'll probably strike at night anyway. So they did that. And that makes the most sense. It's interesting. Alon is absolutely correct. This could go either way. It could be a kind of a big strike, and that would make sense, hitting some of these other proxies to basically send them a message or a statement that, yes, we will hit you. And I don't know what they hit already, but it may have been in such a way that it made it sent a more profound message to some of them than they were ready for. So that would make a lot of sense. I also kind of think that if they were doing a circuitous route with the airstrikes and possibly running up through Syria and Iraq to get to Iran, which is possible, particularly with some of the things that were discussed some of the things that Iran told some of the regional countries like Saudi Arabia and certainly Jordan and others that they would do. That is an option that Israel could have looked at, and they may have been basically clearing the route. So while they're flying over this, they're basically clearing air defense capabilities along the way of their main strike mission forces on their way to Iran. So that's also a possibility that I wouldn't completely rule out. But I do think that one of the things that with the strike mission, from what we know of it, is that they hit some key command and control targets. The sort of things that I'm hearing, and certainly what Alon was talking about, it kind of indicates to me they went after some command, control, communications, leadership targets, possibly like an IRGC headquarters in Tehran or something along those lines. That was the message, and they went into Tehran. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And I'm curious to see what those strikes in Tehran look like. What aircraft they used, what they hit it with. That really goes to it. And I'm going to kind of leave with this. I'm not sure, but look, the Iranian regime is deeply unpopular in Iran, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has already reached out to the Iranian people, to express his feelings about the regime, if you will, and end treaty, if you will, and with that, there is a way to do strikes in such a way that could really unbalance the regime, take out some of their pillars of power, if you will, in certain ways. So I'm not so sure, and I defer to Lone's insight on this, but there are those elements within the cabinet, certainly, that would say, look, this is a chance, this is an opportunity. And they may be looking at something a little bit more decisive with the Iranian threat. I don't rule that out. I don't think you're going to get that one big strike mission in one night. You're going to have to do multiple strike missions over multiple nights in order to pull that off. But that is something that certainly they would have talked about. Whether or not that's the plan, I don't know. But I would be surprised if that wasn't one of the courses of action that they looked at some point during their strike planning.
Yeah, Lone, talk to us about the spectrum of opinion within the Israeli top leadership. I mean, and I should also mention what we just had on our screen a moment ago, the PMO releasing an image of Netanyahu, Gallant, and military officials at the IDF's underground headquarters amid the strikes on Iran. Tell us a little bit about what we've been hearing about how Israel has been discussing carrying this out.
So before I jump into that, I just want to say there's been a news flash from the Faras. That's like the main news agency in Iran, and obviously has to be taken very much with a grain of salt. And often it's the state-run media. What they are reporting is that from an initial, from an initial inspection, several military bases in the west and southwestern areas of Tehran were subject to an Israeli attack. So the official state media in Iran is saying that the attack targeted military bases. Again, and they're not reporting if there's any hits or casualties or things like that. At this point, they're unlikely to do that, even if that does happen, unless they want to justify a retaliation. And before I answer your question, I just want to say one more thing about the different cities where there have been reports that explosions have occurred. One of them is Isfahan. Isfahan is an area in Nantaz where Israel carried out, or reportedly, Israel carried out its strike in April. There is a nuclear facility there. In April, they targeted the air defense systems. So very likely that is a main center that Israel will be targeting. Another interesting site is Karaj. Karaj is an area near Tehran where there was already an attack that occurred, explosions occurred in 2021. And then it was said that there was a drone that attacked some sort of nuclear factory. Again, this was all very secretive. No one claimed responsibility. And later on, Iran actually said that one of their nuclear sites had been targeted. So again, in Karaj, there appears to be a nuclear site which in the past has been targeted. And again, targeting a nuclear site does not mean attacking Iran's nuclear capabilities. It is very unlikely that Israel is going to attack Iran's nuclear capabilities after pretty much explicitly being told not to by the United States. Israel is dependent on the United States to support it in the event of this escalation. So at the same time, it could be that attacks against the military bases that are around nuclear facilities or attacks against the air defenses, as Hal was saying before. It seems that you're going after specific strategic targets in order to maybe lay the path for, if this escalates further, to show your capabilities or things like that. Very likely just the array that has been attacked in Iran itself is indicating that there's a message being sent specifically around the nuclear sites, even if attacks are not targeting the nuclear sites directly. But again, as I keep on saying, that's speculation based on what's essentially civilians in Iran are reporting where explosions are. I'll just address your question pretty quickly about the array of different opinions within Israel. the Israeli cabinet is made up of an array of different parties. Essentially, Prime Minister Netanyahu has, throughout the war, on the one hand, driven the idea that the war has to continue towards this, sort of abstract total victory, which many have said just means the war goes on forever. At the same time, he's also been quite cautious about not authorizing or approving things like the general's plan, at least not publicly, things like, resettlement in the Gaza Strip or things like that. So he's said, the war needs to go on until some sort of total victory, but also not seeking to have permanent presence in the Gaza Strip, have a permanent presence in Lebanon, or escalate things beyond, into perpetual war. In his cabinet, however, there are other elements, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, who themselves are from parties who do aspire for visions of what's known as Greater Israel, expanding Israel's borders, resettlement in the Gaza Strip. There's even a movement that is affiliated with some of these parties that has started to develop a settlement plan for southern Lebanon. So those obviously are people who are saying, no, Israel has to survive on its sword, so to speak. It has to be prepared for war. It's in a very hostile environment. Those parties are also quite blatantly racist against Arabs. Therefore, if you have a chance to strike at the evil as far as they're concerned in the Middle East, now is the time. An interesting figure in that is seen in this picture, Yoav Gallant. Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, ironically, despite being the defense minister and the person in charge of the military, has actually been one of the more moderating voices within the Israeli government, because he has constantly said the military has to be activated, but there has to be a coherent strategy. He's the one that's been calling from day one for Israel to develop an exit strategy from Gaza, to develop a day after plan. So the fact that this attack is being, sort of orchestrated right now by Netanyahu and Gallant also may tell us something about the extent to which it's going to spiral and escalate, because when it comes down to it, after all the cabinet debates, they are the two who are going to make the decisions.
Al, what kind of conversations are going on in a room like the one we're looking at right now?
Well, there are, obviously the plan is in place. They're already executing, so there's no planning that's going on there. What they're talking about is probably next steps. A lot of things that you plan next. Some things will be kind of fixed, but some things won't be completely fixed, because what you want to know is, what is your battle damage assessment? What did you accomplish? Do we need to launch a follow-up strike to eliminate that target? And there's a lot that goes into that. I can tell you that one of the challenges is you have you have to look at a lot of other sources of intelligence, not just the pilots will tell you something. I mean, the strike mission, the folks on the strike mission will tell you something. But if you've done anything working with airstrikes and working with pilots, historically they always seem to have more effect on target than we found out they did later on. So we always like to confirm that with other sources that can actually go in there and see what was the actual effect. Because when you're whizzing by a target fairly fast, you can see things, but you can't make a full assessment like we can if we take an image from a satellite or something else, an hour later, where we get a better idea of what exactly was destroyed or not destroyed. So that's part of the discussion here, which is, do we need to conduct what would sometimes be called branches or sequels, which is, this would be the next phase, a sequel of what we just did. This is a branch plan we have to go off in other directions should conditions set themselves, and we should pursue that. That would be the essence of the discussion here, would be, and because of the audience is all military, I would imagine that the political factors, except for the international political factors, such as, well, what will the Saudis do, or what will the Jordanians do, or what should we expect from the Syrians, or something like that, that would certainly be part of a discussion like that. But internal domestic politics would probably not be a big part of this discussion, simply because of the individuals who are right around the table. I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying I would be surprised if with this particular group they would talk about that. You really want to focus on the military side of this and the military objectives, and which way to go now that this is done. And of course, a lot of this, hey, this is dangerous business. Warfighting is when they say go into harm's way, it's not just a phrase. That's what it is. So there's always the possibility that there could have been friendly losses incurred in these strike missions. And if that did happen, I'm sure that would be a big part of the discussion as well.
So Alone, don't be shy about chiming in if you do have anything that's coming across your plate. That's one of the reasons why we love Alone. He can read all of these different sources in real time, and sometimes they're not in English, and that's sometimes how we get.
So the only thing.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm about to say the only thing is that Sky News in Arabic is reporting that one of the targets that the IDF attacked in Iran is a military base for launching ballistic missiles, which again may tell us something.
Yeah.
If the attack that Iran carried out wide was so much more escalatory than the attack in April, was using ballistic missiles, and then the retaliation is against a base that's used to fire ballistic missiles, that's a signal. You and I have talked countless times about the tacit signals that go between. That's a signal to say we're within the circle of this retaliation. We're not now taking it towards and we're going to attack the government buildings in Iran, and we're going to something. That's like say you attacked with this, and FYI, we're going to destroy that. Like that's within the game of sending a message. This is not us now escalating to a much higher level. You attack with ballistic missiles, we're destroying your ballistic missiles. That's again from the initial report there.
Your reaction now.
I was going to say that's it's very, very much quid pro quo, which is this is what you hit us with, so we're going to take out your ability to do that. And that's kind of what I've been expecting. I would have been actually surprised if Israel did something where they did not attack the ballistic missile capability. I kind of assumed that would be in all their planning efforts, that would be one of the things that they would always look at is we want to hit their ballistic missiles. Now, one of the things I will be curious to see is what they did about their drone capability and whether they may have hit one of the drone manufacturing facilities in Iran. That's interesting because that sends a very, very different strategic message. First off, it says, quit sending drones our direction, which I think is a pretty reasonable message to send. And then the other one is it also limits what they can send to places like Russia. And I think if we hear that one of the larger drone manufacturing capabilities was taken out, or wherever they keep drones was taken out, there's some inferences we can make from that. Again, at this point, we don't know. There's no reports on that. But I think ballistic missiles makes absolute perfect sense. And I really do think that, and I think Alone put it very clearly that, we have reports, initial reports, obviously, that they hit some places where at least one of them has a nuclear facility there. And they don't necessarily have to hit the nuclear facility. Let me just put it this way. If you take out all the air defense around the nuclear facility, you've definitely made a message as to, we're wide open now. And so if they do escalate, that's a message for the counterstrike, for the response, which is we've now left you completely defenseless in this strategic site. So that's a message to Khomeini. That's a message to the IRGC. It's a message to the regime, which is if you want to bump this up one more level, this is where you are now. And that should hopefully have some sort of sobering effect on some of the thinking, the dialogue within the regime on what their next step is.
So, Alone, this is something that you and I talked about. This happened over the weekend. This is footage from outside Benjamin Netanyahu's home. We do know that there was a strike that hit his private residence in northern Israel. What do we know about that attack? That happened over the weekend, and there's been some finger pointing since then, and Iran has been in those conversations, correct?
Absolutely. Israel went very much out of its way to try and blame Iran for this. That we've been in a sort of 25-day waiting period between Iran's attack and Israel's retaliation. And during that's a long time when it comes to also the pace of things and the way they develop in the Israel-Hamas war in the last year, and most wars, but specifically this war with so many actors, every day something changes. That's a long time. And one of the things that Israel really wanted to maintain was its justification. Its justification to retaliate, its justification to now hit back at Iran. And then there was this drone attack. 3 drones were launched from Lebanon. 2 were intercepted. 1 got past all the air defenses and hit the prime minister's house, actually hit the bedroom window. According to reports, the prime minister was not there, although there's some conflicting evidence about that. The neighbors said that they saw a convoy leaving, but it was a small convoy. The official report is that Netanyahu was actually not in the house at that time. Israel very much went out of its way to say this was Iran. At first, they said that Iran gave the order to Hezbollah to carry this out. Then there were reports in Israel that, near as I can tell, were not backed with evidence, at least that was published. But there was a lot of reports that were saying that Iranian agents were actually involved in the launching of the drones, which I almost would say would be too convenient for that to be the case. Hezbollah is very capable of firing drones by itself. Israel was trying to substantiate Iran tried to assassinate the prime minister. That gives a much higher level of justification for whatever retaliation you want to make. And there was some speculation that Israel may even be preparing the groundwork for an assassination of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. You tried to assassinate the leader of Israel. Okay, now we're gonna retaliate. Iran, understandably, vehemently denied this. They said they had nothing to do with this. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations gave interviews to lots of different press outlets within the United States and said this was not us. Hezbollah went out of its way to say this was only us. This had nothing to do with Iran. And one of the things I found somewhat humorous, right? You've never seen an organization try to take so much responsibility for a failed assassination attempt, but specifically saying again and again, this was us. It was only us. Don't blame anyone else. It was only us. All that was all in order to try to keep Iran out of it, and make sure that this remains between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, did that assassination attempt on Prime Minister Netanyahu change the equation of what Israel was going to retaliate? Israel was saying yes. Israel was saying now the retaliation is going to be harsher. Realistically, thus far, I'm not seeing that. Thus far, it does not appear that the nature of the retaliation is not attacking the symbols of power, like the government buildings or the supreme leader. It's not something that's supposed to be on par to an assassination attempt with the prime minister, at least thus far. And it's just also important to note, Israel does have that capability. We've seen Israel carry out an assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in the heart of Tehran when he was there for the inauguration of the president. So conceivably, and again, of course, Israel never claimed responsibility for that, but I think we can all safely say that Israel carried that out. Yeah. So very likely Israel does have the capability to do those kinds of things. The fact that they, at least until now, have not been done in this retaliation means very likely Israel wanted the justification for a harsher retaliation, but is not yet at least carrying it out.
Let's go to some tweets. We're hearing from, this is the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Reports indicate a second wave of strikes is underway with explosions heard in Shiraz. I think we have another one to cycle through as well from the Post itself. The same thing. A second wave of strikes reported following blasts heard in Shiraz. This is southern Iran. Hal, what can you tell us when we hear about a second wave?
Well, I'm gonna leave it to Alon to talk about Shiraz itself, but I will tell you this. All right, there are a number of things I can think of down south that they would want to hit, but I will say that a second wave of strikes, interesting choice of language, which makes me wonder, was there a first wave that would have hit the Shiraz area if they're calling this a second wave, or is this just a separate strike or wave of strikes that hit down south? That's kind of what I'm wondering. What that tells me is, further south you have these strikes. That's for mission planners. How do you get your aircraft, presuming it's aircraft, or missiles, or drones for that matter? How do you get them there? And you start looking at the geography, and then you start looking at the legs, and you start looking at how far can the aircraft fly without in-flight refueling? Where would you put those tankers? Where would you position them for in-flight refueling? Anytime you do in-flight refueling, it always makes for a much more interesting evolution in terms of strikes. There's just a lot of mission planning considerations that they have to go through. And the further south they go, especially when you start getting hitting, much further south. For example, if I hear they hit Bandar Abbas or something like that, that'll definitely get my attention. But the further south you go, the less likely they would have done a circuitous route, the more likely they would have probably done a more direct route, which means they would have flown over Saudi Arabian airspace, potentially UAE airspace as well, going into these areas, depending on where they hit. And so those would be some things that I would think of. That would be some considerations that I have from a strike planning. But again, I kind of point to the language. Second wave of strikes. I'm just not sure if this is another wave that was part of the first wave that just hit a little bit later. That would tell me is that this is not just a I hate to use the term one and done, but that this may be going on a lot longer rather than shorter, depending on what it is. But it just depends on what that exactly means. And I'll leave it up to Alon to maybe provide some insight into the Shiraz region itself.
Yeah, Alon, your reaction to A, second wave, and B, Shiraz, the significance of that area.
So I'll say a couple of things. First of all, I agree. I totally agree with Hal that there's a couple of things to learn about the second wave and the fact that it's down south. Second wave, I'm not sure if it indicates that they attacked in Shiraz previously, or if it just means that the IDF is ongoing. That it's not 100 planes carry out a bombing and return back. When Israel attacked the Iraqi nuclear facility in 1981, that's what happened. We had a series of planes come, bomb, return to Israel. This is not that. This appears to be several waves of planes that are coming in maybe from different directions, targeting different things. So that's what I learned from the fact that it's a second wave. And the fact that it's down south, I totally agree. We have to consider airspace. Iran sent a lot of messages to its different neighbors, to Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all saying, if you let Israel use your airspace in its retaliation against us, we will attack you back directly. So if, in fact, that is what happened, that has its own potential for escalation in the Middle East, far beyond between Iran and Israel at this point. The choice of Shiraz is very interesting and may also be part of, and this is now total speculation on my part of a deal that was made between Israel and the United States. In Shiraz, as far as I know, there is no established nuclear facility. However, back in April of this year, we're talking about 7 months ago, Iran announced that it was going to begin building a new nuclear facility in Shiraz. It was announced in its council, its nuclear council, and in the official state TV. Very, very possibly, this would have been sort of the compromise between Israel and the United States. The United States saying, don't attack nuclear facilities. Israel wanting to make a message, send a message, and attack nuclear facilities. Maybe, just maybe, attack a nuclear facility that's not actually active. Attack a nuclear facility that's being built. Attack the site that is being targeted for that. Total speculation on my part. I don't know where the attacks happened in Shiraz. Could have been military bases, could have been a million different things. But when I heard Shiraz, the first thing that I remembered is, wait a minute, wasn't there a nuclear facility that was being built there? So very possibly this is just, the way Israel and the United States came to an understanding. Okay, we want to let Israel send the message. We don't want to attack nuclear facilities. Here is a good middle ground, a nuclear facility that's just being built.
It's unfortunate we don't have Shiraz pinned down on this map here, but we see Tehran up there in the northern part of Iran, and then Shiraz would be somewhere in the southern portion of the yellow portion of this map alone, correct?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Shiraz, I mean, I can't pinpoint, with the mouse.
Of course.
And I've often begged you to let's have maps up and interactive things. So one day we'll get there. But one of the things to take away from here is the amount of sort of white lines that we see in sort of western parts of Iran. That is all the different countries. So again, when Hal and I were talking about airspace, you have to travel. We see where Israel is. You have to travel over airspace of different countries in order to get to Iran. Israel does not, at least near as we know, have any air bases that are positioned in areas that are closer to Iran, at least in the southern parts. Israel does have some relations with countries like different countries. There's been all kinds of rumors of different countries, Afghanistan. Yeah, again, it's all rumors. So it's hard to know where exactly Israel has air bases, but in the areas that are around Iran, possibly Turkmenistan, possibly Azerbaijan. But that is north of Iran. So like no matter what, there had to be some movement of aircraft over airspace of other countries. One of the things that I'm sure will be called into question, and that's one of the reasons that we're going to see the United States heavily deny this, is theoretically, of course, the U.S. has lots of air bases in Qatar. That Qatar is right there. That's that island that you see in the sea that's right across the sea from Shiraz. So that's going to be raised as a question very, very quickly, and I wouldn't be surprised if within a few hours we see both Qatar and the United States denying that any Israeli aircraft was stationed in that country.
Al, what kind of presence does the U.S. have in the region right now?
Oh, it has a very substantial presence in the region. I've had a chance to see a lot of it firsthand for an extended period of time. But we have a few bases in Kuwait. We have a very large, robust air facility in Qatar, which provides a lot of strategic projection capability throughout the region. We have a very significant position in Bahrain. We have a very large naval facility there, along with some other things. And of course, the UAE, we have a presence as well. We have a large naval presence throughout the entire region. We still have forces up in Iraq. We have forces up in Syria, which not in direct connection with this, but certainly from a force protection standpoint, whatever we have in Syria is always a big consideration with whatever's going on throughout the region. So we have forces arrayed there. And then, of course, if you get next to it, we have forces. We have a base in Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa, right near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. I may have spent some time there as well. And then, of course, we have naval forces floating all around in the Persian Gulf, around the Persian Gulf, in the Red Sea, in the Eastern Mediterranean, all over there. So there's a lot of forces. And as you know, there's the report of an F-16 squadron that just arrived just prior to these strikes, very coincidentally and fortuitously. And I don't know where they are. I could make some educated guesses where they are, but I don't want to make educated guesses like that on the air. But I would imagine they'd be in some place where they could be used to the greatest advantage for air defense, probably going after drones, potentially, depending on what they're set up with, potentially some anti-missile capability as well. But that would be my guess. But it's pretty big. Last time I checked, in terms of personnel, it was about 40,000 plus personnel throughout what we call the CENTCOM area of responsibility, which is that Middle Eastern area. That doesn't mean it's 40,000 personnel right there along the Persian Gulf, but in that region, it's 40,000. And I should mention that technically the forces in Djibouti would not count because that's Africa. That's not actually the Central Command area of responsibility. So that's a pretty good sized force. And it's not, and I also should mention, it's a lot of them are more what I would call higher tech forces, or not line infantry forces out there. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about crews on very advanced naval combatants. We're talking about air crews and air and anti-air capability in the region as well. So personnel is not really the best measure of our capabilities. We have a lot of systems, a lot of weapons, a lot of capabilities that go well beyond just the raw count and the number of military personnel that are on the ground.
Alone, I know you've been scouring the international news wires. Anything?
Actually, coming out of Syria, and it's interesting. The Syrian Defense Ministry has said that there's been attacks against several different military sites in the south and central Syria regions. They say that they intercepted a lot of missiles and that the results are still being examined. What we know about the attacks in Syria is that there were initial explosions that were reported in Damascus. Then there were reports of explosions also in Homs and a couple of different regions. what I would usually trust is the various different opposition news sites that they're usually pretty accurate with what has been attacked. You know, they're not on the side of the government, and they're certainly not on Israel's side either. They sort of like see themselves on the side of Syria, but they're pretty accurate often in saying what are the sites that are attacked and who they belong to. The Voice of Capital, that is one of the Syrian opposition radio stations, said that the attacks in homes targeted the air defense capabilities, so very much matching what Hal was saying before, that this is, sort of like laying the groundwork to say if this escalates further, we've made our life a lot easier as far as Israel's concerned to continue further escalations. Then there were other reports in another opposition news outlet that said that in the areas of El Khalib, which is in southern Syria, so that does match also what the Syrian Defense Ministry said, there were attacks that specifically targeted radar bases. That is also interesting because there is a lot of cooperation between Iran and Syria officially. There's Iranian troops on the ground in Syria. There's Iranian Revolutionary Guards bases within Syria itself. There's also a lot of cooperation between Iran, Hezbollah, Khatib Hezbollah, the Islamic Defense Brigades, all that are on the border between Iraq and Syria. And they all work together. And having radar capabilities in such a sensitive area, regardless of who's operating it. If it was Syrian, it was Iranian, it was Iranian Revolutionary Guards. If it was one of the militias, for all intents and purposes for Israel, that doesn't matter. That means that that's someone who's going to be reporting back to Iran what is happening. Once again, I'll say the fact that there are more and more attacks being reported in Syria and Iraq, as far as seeing the trajectory of this, I actually see as almost a de-escalatory signal that Israel is sending. It's not carrying out wave after wave of bombings within Iran. It's not continuously, we're not seeing pictures emerging of Tehran going up in flames. Instead, we are seeing Iranian targets. We're seeing a very strong display of force across Iran and across its interests in the Middle East. But we're also seeing, again, that spread. We're seeing, and in Syria and in Iraq, right? It's a different show of force. It's not showing we can strike anywhere we want and how hard we want in Iran. Instead, it's saying we are showing our display of force. We can strike anywhere we want in the Middle East. But as far as the next step, as far as Iran retaliating, a monumental strike in Iran would have almost, quote unquote, forced a retaliation from Iran. A strike that occurs against targets in Syria and in Iraq, and I haven't heard much about the attacks in Iraq. I'm going to look that up right now. Attacks that have been targeting those types of things, Iran can much more afford to spiral.
Harris rallying with Beyonce live in Houston. With 11 days to go, why that they are in Texas with a message that Harris is hoping will propel her to victory in just a few days from now. Plus, one of her biggest backers is here with me in New York. Mark Cuban is going to weigh in on Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and how he thinks Harris should close this deal. Meanwhile, tonight, we're also tracking major news.
military bases the Israeli military has been striking inside of Iran tonight, but Israeli officials are taking pains to emphasize that these are only military targets, that they are not striking at any energy targets, nuclear or oil facilities, which we know had been considered by the Israeli government earlier in this process. I do expect that we will get a fuller accounting from the Israeli military of the targets that they struck and the number of aircraft potentially that appear to have been involved in this strike. What I can tell you from speaking with Israeli officials is that this decision to carry out these strikes on military targets was the process of weeks of deliberations within the Israeli security cabinet, as well as weeks of consultations between Israeli and U.S. officials. One Israeli official describing this to me tonight as a, quote, very diligent decision-making process. Another Israeli official telling me that they went after targets that, quote, posed a threat or could pose a threat to the state of Israel. Admiral Daniel Hagari, the Israeli military spokesman, in a video statement tonight saying that Israel has the right to defend itself and that it is now prepared for all offensive and defensive scenarios. But for the time being, Israel's Home Front Command has yet to make any changes in its guidelines. And for now, the situation in Israel is effectively normal. Caitlin.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I should note, we have heard that President Biden has been briefed. He's in Delaware on this. Of course, the U.S. had been advising Israel on how to respond, trying to kind of restrain what that response would look like, whether they were striking military targets, nuclear sites, oil facilities. Do we know how much that factored into the weeks of planning that you were just talking about for this response that we're seeing right now?
There's no question that it was a significant factor in the Israeli decision to ultimately focus this attack solely on military targets, because we know that it was early on that the Israeli prime minister and some of his top advisors were indeed looking at something that would have been much more significant, much more escalatory, like those energy infrastructure targets. Ultimately, it was clear that those consultations played a major role, as well potentially as the deployment of a major and very advanced U.S. air defense system, the THAAD air defense system, which arrived in Israel last week and has now been deployed and is indeed fully operational in Israel with a contingent of some 100 U.S. troops, which could defend Israel from any future Iranian retaliation. And indeed, we do expect that there will be some kind of a response from Iran. Israeli officials who I've spoken to in recent weeks have emphasized that this Israeli retaliation, which we are now watching play out right now as we speak, they did not expect that to be the end of the story. The question now is, how significant will that Iranian retaliation actually be? Will the fact that Israel only struck military targets factor into their decision-making as far as whether or not to respond with something more significant, something that is kind of proportional here, or perhaps even something that takes the temperature much lower in this region?
Yeah, it's not an overstatement to say the whole world is watching to see what that's going to look like. Jeremy Diamond, as you get updates from the IDF on what they're hitting, please bring those to us. We'll check in with you throughout the hour. I also want to bring in CNN's chief national security correspondent, Alex Marquardt, who is here with me. Alex, we're looking at a live image right now of Tehran, watching where Israel's responding inside of Iran, these certain targets. Jeremy just mentioned the 100 U.S. troops who are in Israel deployed because they're required to work that sophisticated defense missile system that has been deployed to Israel. When it comes to that and how U.S. officials are waiting to see what this response is going to look like, what are you hearing from sources in Washington?
Well, I think the overarching hope, Caitlin, is that whatever we see tonight could be absorbed by the Iranians and that they would not instigate another turn, if you will, and launch another salvo of rockets, missiles, and drones like we've seen over the course of the past few months. That may be wishful thinking. So I think a lot of this depends on what we actually see in terms of the targeting, the damage that is done tonight by the Israelis. And we should caution everyone that it might not just be, one evening. This is something that could drag out over the course of several days. That remains very much to be seen. But Caitlin, I want to pick up on something that Jeremy was saying, because I do think that over the course of the past 24 days since that October 1st strike by Iran with those 180 ballistic missiles, there has been not just these consultations, but essentially a negotiation that was underway with fairly significant pressure from the Biden administration on the Israelis to not go after some of those bigger targets that would lead to more escalatory action by the Iranians, getting them to essentially commit to these military targets. And they have done that tonight. We understand from both the IDF and the White House saying explicitly that only military targets are being struck. And in return for that, they essentially got that THAAD air defense system that you've been talking about, very sophisticated. It is something that can take down with extremely high precision, short, medium, and intermediate range missiles. But they also got more oil sanctions against the Iranians. We saw more F-16s arriving in the Middle East just today. And you'll recall, Caitlin, there was that strike by B-2 stealth bombers against Houthi targets just a few days ago. So there are quite a few actions that the Americans have taken against enemies of Israel in recent days and in defense of Israel, essentially in a way to make them feel comfortable that they don't have to go into Iran in a much bigger way. So there is certainly a hope in Washington tonight that what we're seeing now is kind of the extent of the target set. Caitlin?
Yeah, and Alex, we're looking at this. Here it is, October 25th. This response that they are retaliating against is obviously there's been a lot going on with the back and forth, but it's for Iran's attack on Israel on October 1st, which we all watched play out. And, you know, it was kind of every single day, what was this response going to look like? And we heard a lot of warnings from the defense minister in Israel saying it's going to make your jaws drop, what this is going to look like. I mean, I think it's a real question of whether or not, since it's 4:30 in the morning, if we have a good picture of what this looks like right now.
I don't think we do. We first started getting word just over 2 hours ago that there had been explosions west of Tehran. We don't know if that's it. We could certainly see more in the coming hours. We could certainly see more in the coming days. And I think one of the scarier scenarios, Caitlin, is if the Israelis do inflict a good amount of pain on the Iranians tonight, not only could they feel a need to respond soon, say in the coming days, could they respond tonight? I think that is certainly a real concern. But you're absolutely right. Over the course of the past 3 weeks, there has been anticipation building towards this moment. And we heard very quickly from President Biden himself that there was a hope and expectation that the Israelis would not go after Iranian nuclear facilities, that they would not go after Iranian oil facilities in a way that would drive up oil all around the world. But we did know for a fact, and I think we're seeing it now, that whatever this Israeli retaliation was going to be, it would be bigger than what we saw back in April when Israel essentially went after a symbolic target. They just hit an air defense system in Isfahan, essentially telling the Iranians, hey, we can get through your air defense systems. I would imagine that when the dust settles after tonight's strikes, that there will be a pretty decent amount of damage on these military targets. But that is really going to determine what happens next, Caitlin.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we're looking at this at 11 days out from the election. I mean, I was just in Israel a few days ago. This is certainly something that people are talking about because when Netanyahu is having these conversations with the White House, which have not been pleasant, when you know the diplomatic speak, you can always tell when people say it was a very candid conversation what they mean it looks like. But Netanyahu's been on the phone with Donald Trump, who is not urging restraint. He's actually been saying, you know, Israel should do whatever it feels it needs to do in this situation.
Well, absolutely, and not too many details from former President Trump. He's basically been telling them to get the job done. I think there was a level of confidence in the White House that what is happening tonight was what they expected to happen. We've been told for the past few days we know what the Israelis are going to do, and we feel pretty confident. But as you point out, Caitlin, there have been repeated examples of defiance of the Biden administration by Prime Minister Netanyahu. So there's simply never 100% confidence that the Israelis are going to do what the U.S. expects them to do. Caitlin?
Yeah, I think President Biden would certainly agree with that as they're watching this play out. Alex Marquardt, please keep us updated on what we're hearing. Watching this all very closely in the Middle East. There's also major developments happening here on the campaign trail at home, I should note. Right now, Donald Trump is flying to Michigan after he taped a 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan. He's just apologized to the crowd that you see waiting on him in Michigan, asking them to stay up late because he's running several hours late to that event. He hasn't even landed yet. Meanwhile, on the left side of your screen, you are looking at Houston. That is where Vice President Harris is about to bring two very famous Texans, Willie Nelson and Beyonce, to help her deliver a message to voters that she's hoping will go far beyond the Lone Star State. We're going to bring that event to you live when they get on stage. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Why are they in Texas? It's not a battleground, certainly not in the presidential race. They've got a Senate race happening. But this is not why Harris is rallying there with just 11 days left in this race. What her campaign is saying tonight is that Texas is ground zero when it comes to this fight over reproductive rights. They've got one of the strictest abortion bans in the country in Texas, of course. As you know, we've heard stories from women there. And Harris is hoping that issue is going to propel her to victory in a race that right now could not be closer. CNN's last national poll, the final one that we'll do of this presidential race, finds that this contest is completely tied up. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was also on his own in Texas today, hammering away on immigration and also repeating a line that he rolled out yesterday that pretty much sums up his closing message.
We're like a garbage can. We're like a garbage can for the rest of the world to dump the people that they don't want.
Here's what Vice President Harris had to say about that comment.
It's another example of how he really belittles our country. This is someone who is a former president of the United States, who has a bully pulpit. And this is how he uses it to tell the rest of the world that somehow the United States of America is trash. The president of the United States should be someone who elevates discourse and talks about the best of who we are and invests in the best of who we are.
Speaking of investors, my lead source tonight is a billionaire businessman and investor. He has spent 2 years focusing on drug prices with his company Cost Plus Drugs. In addition, he, of course, stars on ABC's Shark Tank and is a vocal Harris supporter. Mark Cuban, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin.
When you hear Donald Trump say that the United States has become the garbage can for the world as a dumping ground, I mean, just as someone who, you have such an amazing success story, what do you make of that comment?
I get mad. I get pissed off. I mean, this is our country. It's beautiful. We love it. I'm still part of the older generation, love it or leave it. And to say that we've become the garbage can is insulting to every single American.
You know, when you look at your surrogacy for Harris, you've been out there stumping for her, making the argument for her. The New York Times called you the most surprising surrogate for her. You're someone who's known Donald Trump for a long time. You used to actually give him political advice. And I wonder, you know, when you describe your relationship, I was looking at this today, in 2016, you said that you and Trump had a love-hate relationship. How would you describe that relationship now?
I mean, he truths about me on Truth Social, but we don't have a relationship. That's as close as we come. I haven't spoken to him since right before he left the White House.
What do you make of how he was when you knew him 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and the candidate that you do see out on the campaign trail today?
Yeah, I mean, the weave is on his head and in his mouth, and it's not working. You know, he's slowed down. There's no question about it. Having known him for 25 years, early on in the early 2000s, you can have a legitimate conversation with him. It's just now it's talking point. And I just don't see, you can see he's declined. It's just reality. Father Time is undefeated. You can't be 78 years old and not expect some decline.
Do you think voters see it that way? I mean, obviously it was a major issue for Biden. He's not in this race anymore because of it. They don't see Trump the same way?
No, not at all. Because Trump never is intellectual about anything. You don't ever think of Donald Trump and think, wow, that was really an in-depth conversation he had with somebody. You don't think of Donald Trump and say, that was really nuanced in what he had to say about this position or his policy. You don't hear him talk in-depth about policies at all. And so you can get by with just sound bites. You can get by with being loud and boisterous and salesy. And to some people, that comes across as being the right thing to do.
I mean, it comes across like that to a lot of people. We're looking at how close this race is. And, you know, we had the town hall with Harris this week. We heard from voters saying, I want specifics from her. I want to know what my taxes are going to look like when I'm filing them in April if she's in the Oval Office. And just when you compare that, as it's now become this thing, people are focusing on the double standard that the both of them face. You know, Trump's plan is tariffs, which, you know,
don't work.
He likens to, or Harris likens to a Trump sales tax. And drill, baby, drill is what he told me at the town hall.
Going to work.
Well, also the U.S. is producing more oil right now than we ever have, which
well, neither side really
talk about.
That's just the nature of the candidacy. Neither side gets into details because Kamala Harris came into this race 13 weeks ago in a deficit in awareness. Even Donald Trump said, who is Kamala Harris? Nobody knows who she is. So she spent the last 13 weeks letting people get to know her. It's tough to do that and to get into detail on policy. Donald Trump has been doing this for 9 years, and he still hasn't gotten into depth in policy. So.
But why do you think he's not punished for not having policy, but she is.
Well, it's like anything else. If you never
Not
do
having
something,
details, I should
yeah,
say.
it's like anything else. If you never do something, you're not expected to do it. If you hear policy and you hear analysis and you have somebody who's pragmatic and open-minded like Kamala Harris, then you expect more and you expect different things. We all have friends who aren't going to talk in depth about anything. Donald Trump's one of those people.
But listen to this one voter, because this isn't just a media, conversation that we're having or within the campaign. This voter, Pam Thistle, the other night, I was so struck by her, listening to her. She's a widow, and she was talking about, putting her kids through school, paying her bills. This is what she said about how she's making this decision.
Stop trashing each other. We don't care. Stop trashing Trump. Trump, stop trashing the vice president. We don't care. The voters don't care. We don't even know the people they're talking about, that this person said this and that. How does that impact the voters? That's who you're talking to. That's who you're serving. This feels like high school gossip. We don't care. We don't want to hear it.
And she's not wrong. People just want to live their lives. They want to get through their lives. They're so stressed by all this. They don't get it. They're not saying to themselves, okay, let me take an in-depth look at different policies. Just communicate to me in a way that lets me know that I can do something with confidence. It's about trust. And I think Kamala Harris, that those 13 weeks just to be tied, all things considered, she's been building trust. Again, it makes it hard to go out there and talk in detail about taxes and business, which is why she has surrogates like me. I can go into the weeds and talk about any of these subjects.
Are you worried she hasn't had enough time?
Yeah.
Do you think that could hurt her in 11 days?
If she had 26 weeks or 52 weeks, it would be completely different. People would know her better. She would have had more time to talk about details, but she doesn't. And like a good CEO, like a good leader, she's put together a team, including myself and others, to go out and communicate things she doesn't have time to communicate. And I think I've been effective. I know others have as well. And I think that's going to make a big difference, and it's underappreciated.
When you look at the Trump campaign, right now, he is selling tennis shoes, crypto, Bibles, watches, coins, Christmas ornaments, NFTs, pieces of his suit from when he was nearly assassinated.
Really? I didn't see
social
that
stocks.
one.
Yeah, shreds of his suit. His
Don't forget
book,
cologne.
His cologne. If he was on an episode of Shark Tank, would you invest in any of those?
No, because he's desperate. You only sell those things because you have to, because you need the money. And it's obvious, look, people think he's this great businessman. If the job of presidency was investing in real estate, picking curtains and fixtures, he'd probably be the most qualified. But it's not. He's not a business person. He's failed early and often. And the worst part about his business career is how many times he rips off hard-working Americans. Trump University, Trump Soho, Trump Foundation. When Michael Cohen was testifying in the New York trials, Michael Cohen took pride in the fact that he underpaid vendors. Just last week when he was in Detroit or in Michigan somewhere, and the audio went out, he started trashing the engineer and saying you shouldn't pay him and you might sue them.
Yeah, you were really bothered by that.
Yes.
Again, a confirmed tornado on the ground in downtown Conyers. It's a very dangerous and life-threatening weather event. Get into the interior section of your house, away from windows or a basement if you have. And there's the debris right there in the Millstead area near the Rockdale Medical Center. Right. Channel 1 Atlanta.
There is a storm coming, an event like the world has never seen before. The emerging event will have little to do with weather, but more about developing situations that were foreseen many years ago. We have always warned you during severe weather and news events that affected many. Now, Channel 1 Atlanta begins a new series to warn you about what's coming soon and make sure you are prepared. Join us on a new journey, as according to a recent survey, a lot of people believe we are living in the last days. Current news events show us now more than ever. In history, time is setting the stage for the coming storm, a new series, now playing only on Channel 1 Atlanta.
an attack on Israel both in April, then October 1st, failed. They were able to fire ballistic missiles, but when they did so, they pretty much ran through their stockpile at that moment, 180 to 200 at a time. They were not able to make contact with the targets that they really aimed to at least publicly vowed to hit. So they are showing themselves to be weakened. They have also shown themselves to have lost some of their proxy force leaders who they relied on strongly, like the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. That was the most important proxy force in the region. When I say proxy force, I mean that's an unofficial militia, a military force for them in the region. So they are losing some of their ability to sort of stretch the long arm of the Iranian state through the region. Israel is feeling good about that, and the prime minister has been saying that they have really started to break away the hold that Iran's axis of terror groups has held on the region. But keep in mind, this tit for tat, this killing, terror leaders, this doesn't mean that it settles anything or that we're moving quickly towards peace. I will note, however, the CIA director is expected on Sunday in Doha, Qatar, to be meeting with the head of the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, as well as the Qatari prime minister. This is one of those last-ditch pre-U.S. election efforts to jumpstart any kind of process that would help free the remaining hostages in Gaza. But there is also a Biden administration effort to stop the fighting on Israel's northern border with what remains of Hezbollah. Despite Israel taking out the leader of that militia, it has not stopped the fighting with Hezbollah that has kept Israelis from returning to their homes in the north. So these are significant measures, but they are not stopping what continues to be an expanding war in the region.
So, Margaret, just to circle back to the very first part of this, what are your sources saying then in terms of the prognosis for any additional peace talks?
Well, the CIA director, Bill Burns, will be in Doha Sunday. That effort it's not even really a effort at peace talks. It is an effort to free hostages that are still held by Hamas since the head, Yahya Sinwar, the military commander who was also a political leader, was killed recently. That just goes to show you can take out a terrorist leader, you don't kill the ideology, and you haven't killed the fighting force. And that is the conundrum that the United States continues to press Israeli leaders that they need to confront. There's pressure on the Israeli prime minister to come up with his own vision for ending the war and withdrawing forces from Gaza. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in the region until today, really trying to pursue just that, offering suggestions and a plan and a proposal with support from other leaders in the region on who would go in and try to govern Gaza if the Israeli military were to pull back. So this has been a Biden administration effort. I am sure they will try to continue it after the U.S. election in the lame duck session, the remaining months of the Biden administration. But at this point, the prospects are pretty limited. It is widely known, and the Prime Minister of Israel has acknowledged that he talked to Donald Trump. He has talked to him at least twice in the past few weeks. They are very much gauging what the U.S. leadership will look like and how that will factor into their plans on how they conduct their own business in the region. The U.S. election has reverberations around the world, and it certainly will in terms of the peace talks and any peace efforts, whether it's Lebanon, Gaza, or Iran.
Absolutely. Margaret Brennan, thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break now. I'm Lana Zak, and you are streaming CBS News 24/7.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS. the justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
If you are just joining us now, CBS News can report some breaking news out of the Middle East that Israel has launched some long-anticipated retaliatory strikes on Iran. At this point, it looks like it is limited to military targets. We're going to go to CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio. He is there in the theater. Ramy, you first said that you were hearing about some reports of explosions in Iran just about an hour ago at this point. What more have you been able to learn?
Sure. Hi, Lana. Yes, about an hour ago, we did hear those initial reports of explosions coming out of Iran's capital of Tehran, in addition to another city just west of Tehran, the city of Karaj, which is about 30 miles west of Tehran. And in that past hour, we have had confirmation from the Israel Defense Forces themselves, from spokesperson Daniel Hagari, saying that they are continuing to conduct precise strikes on what he says military targets there in Iran. And that, of course, is important because how Israel strikes Iran will then dictate on what, if any, retaliation Iran might then do in response. We do, of course, have to stress that the U.S. has supplied a THAAD missile defense system here to Israel in the past week or so that is now up and running, and that, we understand, had been put there in place in anticipation of any potential retaliation from Iran.
And Ramy, it is currently the wee hours of the morning there in Israel. It's the middle of the night, but it's also Shabbat right now, 3 a.m. Is it surprising that this is happening right now? Is there anything more that you can tell us about the timing?
It may be surprising from a religious aspect here. It is 3 a.m. here in Tel Aviv, 3:30 a.m. in Tehran. But the fact of the matter is that this retaliation by Israel against Iran has been telegraphed for the past 3 weeks, ever since Iran fired its some 200 ballistic missiles at Israel on October 1st. So the timing of this, there was a comment from Israel saying that the retaliation, the strike, would be surprising. And so to your question regarding the nature of the evening, with it being the Sabbath right now, this could be the aspect of it that Iran might have been taken off guard just a little bit, perhaps thinking that Israel would not retaliate on the most important day of its week.
It is worth noting, though, that it is the end of the holiday season there. Are we learning anything more, Ramy, about potential damages in Iran, actual areas that were struck, or is it just at this point too early to know that?
Yeah, it's too early right now. Again, we heard only about an hour or so ago of those initial strikes, but we have been seeing initial reports of explosions again in and around the capital, Tehran. There are unconfirmed reports that the headquarters and the barracks of the IRGC, that's the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, have been targeted, but that's just initial unconfirmed reports there. As the hours continue on into the early part of the morning and as daylight comes, we will see what damage has happened in Iran and what, if anything, Iranian state media does report out on this. But as we are right now at 3 a.m. in the morning, we're only hearing of explosions of reports, confirmation from the Israel Defense Forces, but no reports officially of any damage in Iran.
Well, we know you will stay on top of it. Ramy Inocencio in Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Of course.
CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie Daggett covers the Pentagon. He is there for us now. Charlie, our viewers have heard a lot of discussion about the THAAD system that the United States has supplied. Give us some background information about how it operates and why it's important that, or why it's notable that there are U.S. troops there to help operate it.
Lana, that's important. What you said was notable because this is the first time we've had U.S. troops on the ground in a combat capacity since October 7th. Yes, there have been U.S. advisors there. There have been U.S. Special Forces trying to help hunt down hostages and hunt down targets, Hamas targets inside Gaza. This is the first time you're going to see soldiers on the ground in a combat role. And the reason is after that October 1st attack from Iran, it was unexpected. The scale of the attack was unexpected. This is the largest ballistic missile attack that any country has seen, let alone Israel. And it was between 180 and 200, as Ramey said. And there were some of those ballistic missiles that got through. Now, we all know the much vaunted Israeli missile defense system. You've got the David Sling, which takes over from the Iron Dome, which is more of a short range. But this takes out short to mid-range ballistic missiles. So it was a specific weapon specifically put there and manned by U.S. forces. This is important because if they're expecting that kind of Iranian retaliation, this fills a gap there. It is a battalion, it's a group of vehicles that can fire up to 48 interceptors, which doesn't sound like a lot. But the battleships that were involved in the intercepting of the Iranian missiles, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles on October 7th, they only launched about 12 missiles. Okay, so that puts it in sort of reference as to what this THAAD system can do potentially.
And we have just received a statement from the National Security Council. It's short, but it says, we understand that Israel is conducting targeted strikes against military targets in Iran as an exercise of self-defense and in response to Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel on October 1st. Charlie, talk to us about the significance of coordination between Israel and the United States, both in terms of our longstanding partnerships, but also in terms of what has been, in some cases, a rocky relationship.
It has, Lana, especially in recent weeks, because as Margaret had pointed out, the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, that literally took place while Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant was on the phone to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, literally on the phone as that was taking place, a major escalation. And then the retaliation against Iran, of course, the United States, we've got skin in the game, certainly on the ground now inside Israel. But we have to remember there are 40,000 U.S. forces across that region on the ground through Iraq, in Syria. And then you have a carrier strike group. You've got an aircraft carrier, a number of destroyers off the coast of the Mediterranean. You've got a couple of destroyers and a amphibious group there with 2,000 Marines. You have a lot of U.S. military assets there. And the reason I mention that, not just in the defense of Israel, but if Israel attacks Iran, as it has done, it's now confirmed, as that has done, that also puts U.S. forces in the line of fire. So there needs to be a coordination between Israel and the United States, because if something large scale like that happens, then the United States, and I'm told this all the time here at the Pentagon, this is a planning organization, right? They plan for any contingency. So they have to plan for the retaliation from Israel, but then they have to expect, and one of the reasons that THAAD system is in place, that Iran will retaliate in kind. And I think it's very important to point out here, you know, the last time Israel retaliated from the Iranian attack, it was a matter of 4 or 5 days. This is more than 3 weeks now. And that, I think that addresses the scale of the Iranian attack to begin with. And now, I guess, once again, we're in this sort of whole pattern, a wait and see. Was it a limited strike? I guess at first light, we'll see what was targeted and the damage that was done, and whether this will maybe escalate to see what the Iranians will do. But in terms of the United States, they're fully forward postured, as they like to use that term, with their military capabilities and capacities, including that U.S. missile defense system now in Israel.
Well, Charlie, I'm so glad that you brought up the ways in which the United States has not just a military presence in the region, but also an obligation to all those folks that we have over there. as this proxy war between Israel and Iran has played out, and now it is not just a proxy, it is actively engaged, but the United States has also been involved in a more active way. I'm thinking specifically, as you're talking about this, about strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen that have been targeting U.S. and other foreign ships. Is it possible that in any way all that forward-facing U.S. defense planning will be implemented in any of these other aspects in the region?
Lana, let me bring up something that happened just over a week ago. Okay, so the United States has been targeting Houthi targets inside Yemen. It's been going on for some time. There's sort of tit for tat going on that the Houthis have been shooting or aiming for anyway, commercial ships and U.S. battleships. U.S. battleships are fully capable of intercepting, whether it's coming towards them or going somewhere else. But to launch a strike, to launch airstrikes, that's kind of next level. That's to go after the Houthis in Yemen itself. About a week ago, they launched B-2 bombers, B-2 stealth bombers. They don't launch those for any occasion. Those come from the United States. And the reason that it's important, these are stealth bombers, and they are capable of deep penetration, the deep bombs that can take out, in this case, Houthi targets. And without saying so much, they're saying this is sending a message to regional partners, essentially that they can fire up a stealth bomber, fly at long distances, and penetrate deep targets. Well, that's a message, without saying it out loud, to Iran. So there has been a military flex. And that's the first time we've seen that happen, that they actually fired up B-2 bombers for these attacks in Yemen. So yes, you've got the aircraft carriers, you've got a number of F-18s there that are still deployed, F-35s that are still deployed, there's a squadron of F-22s that are still deployed. It's about as forward postured, I hate keep using that phrase, but it's the way the military use it, as it can be without another carrier strike group in the region, which may be under discussion. We can't confirm that yet.
All right. Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon, thank you.
Thank you.
We will continue to follow these updates in the Middle East throughout the night and the weekend. We do know at this point that Israel has launched retaliatory strikes against Iran. They say that they are military in nature, that they are targeting only military assets, but are not targeting oil reserves or anything nuclear, those being requests coming from the Biden administration. President Biden at this moment has been briefed and is said to be closely watching the developments. We are going to take a quick break now. I'm Lana Zak, and you are streaming CBS News 24/7.
Launched nearly 200 missiles at Israel. Those missiles were largely intercepted. That occurred earlier this month. This also comes just a week after Israeli military forces killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar during operations in Gaza. Iran, as you may know, supports Hamas, providing the terrorist organization with weapons and funding. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ramy, what can you tell us?
Major, good evening there. Yes, about half an hour ago, we started hearing initial reports of explosions in Iran's capital of Tehran. Several explosions in and around the capital. Also in the city of Karaj, a city about 30 miles west of Tehran. It appears to be home to an airbase, a military airbase there. We're also hearing unconfirmed reports that the headquarters and the barracks of the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps has also been targeted. As you mentioned, the Israel Defense Forces has released a statement from spokesperson Daniel Hagari. reiterating that they are conducting, quote, precise strikes on military targets in Iran, and that is in response, as they say, to months of continuous attacks from Iran. But they're saying that this is for defensive capabilities, but in addition, offensive capabilities have also been mobilized in the event of a retaliation.
Amy, thank you. Please stand by. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us from the Pentagon. Charlie, remind our audience what U.S. military posturing is in the region and what role the U.S. military might play in what comes next after this Israeli aerial assault in Iran.
Yeah, so Major, this is a retaliation that the United States has been expecting and preparing for since October 1st. There are a number of destroyers in the region and have been for some time that did play a role in intercepting the first barrage between 180 and 200 ballistic missiles. But importantly, they sent the THAAD system in. This is a missile defense system. And we all know how much vaunted the Israeli defense systems are. But this fills a gap. Part of the Israeli defenses were, to my understanding, and people have told us here, overwhelmed. There are a number of missiles that got through, those ballistic missiles. What this does is it addresses that hole. This is the first time you have U.S. boots on the ground in a combat role since October 7th, manning that THAAD missile system. It's got 48 interceptors ready to deploy. It is in place, as Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has put it, ready to deploy at any time. It could go operational if the Iranians or when the Iranians decide to counterattack. So that's already in place. You have the destroyers in place. You have a strike carrier strike group in place. All of that has been in place since October 1st. The THAAD system kind of beefs up that defense system.
D'Agata, please stand by at the Pentagon. I want to bring in CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. So just to remind the audience, there's ongoing military action by the Israelis in Gaza. There has been back and forth military activity in Lebanon, now Iran. This falls under the heading generally of escalation. Samantha, what would you suggest the audience pay attention to in terms of Israeli targeting and whether or not this might be the only response we see from Israel to what Iran has been doing?
Well, Major, Israel is certainly engaged in a multi-pronged effort to diminish Iran's ability to strike Israel in a variety of ways. That's why Israel has been striking targets in Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, and other places. This retaliatory strike by Israel into Iran is in response to Iranian escalation. I would point our viewers to the very carefully worded statement that the Israeli Defense Forces just issued, in which they highlight the fact that they have retaliated against military targets, not against oil infrastructure or nuclear sites. This is a retaliation against military targets based upon Iran sending an unprecedented number of missiles and drones into Israel several weeks ago. I will also note that Israel took its time in implementing this retaliatory strike. They took their time so that they could bolster their own defenses with, as our colleague Charlie D'Agata just mentioned, a U.S. missile defense system and other assets, as well as enabling the United States and other countries to ostensibly enhance protection at our own facilities in the region. A big concern here for the United States is the safety and security, of course, of U.S. personnel in the region. And just yesterday, the State Department issued a threat advisory indicating an enhanced threat level against U.S. and Israeli targets. So overall, Israel is signaling that this was solely against military targets, and U.S. officials are certainly on high alert for any threats that may come to U.S. personnel overseas. Major.
Samantha, please stand by. I want to bring in Face the Nation moderator and our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Margaret Brennan, who joins us by phone. Margaret, what are your sources telling you, and what should the audience know as we are gathering information about this latest escalation in the region? Margaret, I don't believe we are picking you up yet. Can you hear me, Margaret? I don't believe we have Margaret dialed in yet, do we? No. Okay, we don't. I want to go back to Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon. Charlie, not only have the United States military been a presence there for a very long time, expanding it as you indicated. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, just left the region. Tremendous engagement between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government about this response. Put that in some context, if you please.
Yeah, well, Major, this has all been about timing, okay? So for the past 3.5 weeks, we've been waiting for the Israeli response, the Israeli retaliation. Of course, we didn't expect that that was going to happen during a time that the United States Secretary of State was actually in Israel, but it's been hard to tell with the Israelis because they haven't been giving a lot of advance warning for any of the attacks, any of the military operations that they have undergone. Even in terms of this building itself, in terms of speaking to the officials here. So that has something to do with the timing, the Secretary of State being there, the death of Yahya Sinwar, the idea that the hostage negotiations may be underway. They didn't want to necessarily interrupt or foil that. He's no longer in this specific region, so that may have had something to do with the timing. And remember, just a couple of days ago, there was that intelligence leak that came out that had U.S. surveillance looking at Israeli preparations for that. That may have played into it, too.
Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon, also with our thanks to Rami Inocencio in Tel Aviv and Samantha Vinograd. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good evening.
You've probably seen this guy all over your feed claiming he built a $5.5 million business in 90 days with no money. Friend.
In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the State of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. Like every other sovereign country in the world, the State of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. We will do whatever necessary to defend the State of Israel and the people of Israel. In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the State of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. Like every other sovereign country in the world, the State of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. We will do whatever necessary to defend the State of Israel and the people of Israel. In response to months of continuous attack,
A lot of people don't know this. They don't actually count pregnancy.
I'm your host, Carla Hada. We're quickly approaching the top of the next hour. It's about to be 7 p.m. here on the West Coast and 10 p.m. over on the East Coast. A couple of live events that we do have on deck at this moment. This first one out of Traverse City, Michigan, where former President Donald Trump expected to speak at a rally being held there. Now, the former president has had a full day, and we know that he is heading to this rally from recording a podcast episode with Joe Rogan that's expected to air this weekend. And then we also have this, a live look out of Houston, Texas, where you can see the crowd is also waiting for the Democratic presidential nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, set here to headline this rally. We've heard several speakers, and at last check, I believe that she is expected to take the stage right at 7 o'clock West Coast time and 10 p.m. East Coast time. So we'll be monitoring this and see when the vice president finally steps out there to make her remarks. While we wait for that, in the meantime, let's get back to the top story of the day, one of the biggest stories of the day, and that is Israel launching strikes against Iran. And I just want to read through some of the Associated Press and their reporting here in case you are just joining us now. It is a developing story, so details are eliminated, but this is what we know so far. Israel has launched airstrikes early Saturday on what are described as military targets in Iran in retaliation for a ballistic missile assault that happened on October 1st. There was no immediate information on damage in the Islamic Republic. The attack, threatened for weeks by Israel, comes as the Middle East sits on the precipice of a regional war more than a year after an initial attack by the militant group Hamas on Israel. In the time since, Israel has launched a devastating ground offensive in the Gaza Strip and an invasion of neighboring Lebanon, targeting militants long-armed and aided by Tehran. Israel's military described the attack Saturday as, quote, precise strikes on military targets in Iran, without immediately elaborating. In Tehran, which is the Iranian capital, the sound of explosions could be heard, with state-run media there initially acknowledging the blasts and saying some of the sounds came from air defense systems around the city. A resident in Tehran told the Associated Press that at least 7 explosions could be heard, which rattled the surrounding area. The resident spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisals. International flights began diverting around western Iran as news of the strikes broke, and flight tracking data showed that. But beyond a brief reference, Iranian state television offered no other details and even began showing what it described as live footage of men loading trucks at a vegetable market in Tehran in an attempt to downplay the assault. Meanwhile, the Syrian state news agency Sana, citing an unnamed military official, reported, quote, barrages of missiles from the direction of the occupied Syrian Golan and Lebanese territories targeted some military sites in the southern and central regions of Syria early Saturday. Iran has launched 2 ballistic missile attacks on Israel in recent months amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip that began with the Hamas attack on Israel back on October 7th of 2023. That initial attack killing some 1,200 people and saw 250 others taken hostage back to the seaside enclave. So those are just some of the details that we're following here closely at Live Now from Fox. A tweet here from Joey Garrison in reference again to that campaign rally that we are waiting for Vice President Kamala Harris, to step up and make those remarks. Joey says this: per a Harris campaign official, tonight's crowd size in Houston for the rally with Beyonce is 30K. The campaign's largest to date. Now, there was initial reporting that Beyonce would be performing at this rally. It's unclear at this moment if she is going to be performing before or after Harris makes her remarks. A live look once again out at that arena in Houston, Texas. The crowd is large there, and we are still awaiting for Harris to come out here and make her remarks. In the meantime, just wanted to kind of bring you all of these live vantage points that we have here. But let's get back to talking about that top breaking news story regarding the tensions in the Middle East and go back to this, a tweet from Fox News correspondent Lucas Tomlinson, which says this is the largest attack by Israel on Iran in history. And we did just speak with Hussein Abdul Hussein from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies a short time ago. And he said that this is the first time that Israel has declared that they have struck at targets inside of Iran. And right there, we're seeing that just the escalations continue over there on that side of the region, with Israel targeting not just Hamas, but several Iranian proxies all throughout the Middle East. The Jerusalem Post is saying this: over 100 planes were involved in the 2,000-kilometer attack on Iran, including the cutting-edge F-35 stealth fighter. So we're just going to keep bringing you snippets of all of this information as we continue to learn more. So stick with us here at Live Now from Fox as we juggle all of this breaking news and also these live events. But in the meantime, it does seem that another speaker has stepped up at this Harris event in Houston, Texas. Let's go ahead and take that live.
On behalf of myself, my husband, and my family, I have to thank you all for the embracing support that you have given me. Good evening. My name is Andrea, and I live in San Antonio, Texas. In the fall of 2022, after many prayers, my husband and I found out that we were expecting. Everything changed when my water broke one evening, far too early into my pregnancy. After going to the ER and my OBGYN and learning that my pregnancy was not viable, I was given no options, despite being at high risk for infection. Because of Texas extreme laws, I was told I had to wait, which I did in the hospital for days. My baby girl, Emery Jade, was born 5 days after my water broke. She lived only for a few minutes, but I hold my baby close to my heart as my husband, mother, and I sing her to sleep. And when Emery's heart stopped, we continued to embrace her and held her for hours as she lay lifeless. It was immediately after Emery was born and the hospital discharged me that I felt severe pain. Eventually, I found myself in the ER, fearing for my life, where my reality soon changed. I was diagnosed with sepsis and sent into a 6-hour emergency surgery. I endured a partial lung collapse, 2 liters of infected fluid removed from my abdomen, and an incision that ran from under my breast to my pelvic area, which has left a deep scar. I was hospitalized for 3 weeks. My body was overwhelmingly consumed with infection. I nearly lost my life. I remember praying, God, just allow me to be peaceful when I go. After my discharge from the hospital, I required around-the-clock care for 3 months. My mother fed me, bathed me, and even helped assist me in the bathroom while I slowly recovered. Today is the first time I'm sharing my story. It's taken many months of physical and emotional healing to get where I am today. I have come forward so people can learn from my experience and the experiences of other women who have been impacted by these laws. Texas abortion bans unleashed by Donald Trump almost cost me my life and have left me with physical and emotional scars. I'm here to advocate for the women who are unable to share their truths, for the many Black and brown women whose pain is often dismissed and disregarded, for the women like Amber Thurman who have lost their lives under Donald Trump's abortion bans. I never thought I would have this type of personal experience. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. The same people who create these laws should ask themselves, what if it was their loved one? For all the mothers, daughters, granddaughters, there has to be change. Kamala Harris is that change. She is fighting to restore the rights of women that were so wrongly taken away. This election, I proudly cast my vote for Kamala Harris. Because lives depend on it. and I urge you all to do the same. Now, I'm incredibly honored to introduce to the stage Arthur, philanthropist, proud mother, activist, and H-Town's very own Miss Tina Knowles.
You can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'll tell you what's going on. Right on. Right on.
My God. My heart is so full, guys. This is what you call Houston proud. 30,000 people? Oh my God. Houston, you showed up, you showed out, and that's what I'm talking about. Thank you, Andrea, for courageously sharing your story. I am honored to be back in Houston tonight, the city where my girls got their voices. I've been so blessed in my life to have many careers, many black jobs. But I have said before, the best job that I've ever had is being a mother. I've had the privilege of raising and helping to raise 4 daughters. And I also take immense pride in being Mama Tina to so many young women and men. It has been empowering for me. You know, the teleprompter, I'm having a hard time seeing it, guys. I'm just being real here. So it's been powerful to encourage young people and to be there for them as well as my own children. You know, I have always believed that I was raising my girls in a world that with every passing generation was becoming freer for women. With more opportunity for women, a healthier and safer existence for women. And so we cannot accept a country where our daughters and former generations and future granddaughters will no longer have the basic freedom that I have lived with for most of my life. But just as our generation and generations before us did, we will fight for our freedom. Yes. And as I look behind, I also know in order to move forward, we must move with purpose. So I say a prayer that is infused with the strength, faith, and courage of those who came before us. We cannot go backwards, guys. Too many people have died for us to have our freedom. I know in my soul that all those past moments have led us to a time like this. We've got to show up and do our part. And that is why I am here. I am so honored to be here in support of Kamala Harris. And I am also so proud to be here with 2 of my daughters. Please welcome Kelly and Beyonce.
All right, we're listening there as the crowd goes wild. Tina Knowles, Beyonce's mother, introducing her daughter herself there, Beyonce. And also Kelly Rowland, both of them part of the Destiny's Child group. Let's pump up the audio and hear what they have to say.
Welcome. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Welcome to my Houston family. I am so proud to be here back in Houston with my mama T and my sister. Welcome to this day, this remarkable, this joyous day. A date, a day, a time, a moment with weight and meaning for our country, for our people, and for the world. A moment, Houston, where we grab back the pen from those who are trying to write an American story of division and hatred. A moment when we grab back the pen from those who are trying to write an American story of misogyny and racism. We are grabbing back the pen from those who are trying to write an American story that would deny the right for women to make our own decisions about our bodies. Houston, we are grabbing back the pen. We are grabbing back the pen, that pen, to forge a new path with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. We are grabbing back the pen to write a new American story, a story of community, of equality, strength, of kindness, and of hope. When I was a little girl and I pledged allegiance to the United States of America, that meant something to me. That flag meant something to me. And today, that means grabbing that pen and casting my vote, as I already did 2 days ago, for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Now, Houston, you've already had a hand in creating destiny. So do what you do and do this thing again. H-Town. We are so happy to be standing here on this stage as proud country Texas women supporting and celebrating the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris. A woman who's been pushing for what this country really needs right now: unity. It's impossible not to feel the energy in this room, the positivity, the community, the humanity. We are at the precipice of an incredible shift, the brink of history. I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a mother. A mother who cares deeply about the world my children and all of our children live in. A world where we have the freedom to control our bodies. A world where